Well, we're going to convene this meeting of the general plan. It is 5 after 6, and we'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance. And I'll ask Mr. Arceo, could you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
Place your right hand over your heart. Again,
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Are you going to take a roll or okay?
Yes, thank you. I will call out by last name. Guerrero. Here. Okay. Arceo. Chair Lopez. Here. Wilbert. Here. Torres. Here. Kaplan. Here. Rothschild.
Here.
Committee member Bell is absent. We have quorum.
We have one.
Before we start with public comment, we do have our director here. He will have to make a quick exit, so he'd like to take a few minutes.
Okay.
Good evening, committee members. Nathan Freeman, I'm your new Community and Economic Development Director. I think I met most of you as we were doing a quick little walk around. I just wanted to quickly introduce myself. Just for your background, I come to the city of San Bernardino from the city of Riverside, where I spent the last 16 years as the city's Economic Development Manager. It is my pleasure and very exciting to now work here in the city of San Bernardino. Amazing opportunities here. I live in our neighboring community of Redlands. Lifelong Inland Empire resident, and I am very much looking forward to serving the community here. So if myself or staff can be of any assistance to you in the future, please do not hesitate to reach out to me. So again, I apologize that I have to run this evening, but I wanted to make sure I get a chance to introduce myself. Thank you.
Okay, so we'll go on to comments. I have Charles Lawrence from the Montebello Housing Development Corporation. Is he here? Yes. Would you come forward to the mic and make your statements?
I'm not sure this is the appropriate time for me to make a comment to the committee. I'm here representing Montebello Housing Development Corporation, which owns property in Ward number 1. And I'm essentially here to advocate for a specific land use, a residential land use on the property that they own, or rather the general area. And if this is the specific time to advocate for a specific land use, I'll elaborate a little bit. If not, I'll sit back down and do it at a later time if that's more appropriate.
This would be the appropriate time.
Okay, very good. I'll be very brief. Montebello Housing has been in existence for about 25 years, and their mission is to build affordable housing for first-time home buyers. I've assisted them personally with the construction of about 30 homes over a period of 10 years as a consultant. And they have a property on East 2nd Street in Ward number 1, just south of 3rd, of course, and between 3rd and Rialto, and between Alena Road and Tippecanoe. The property has a land use designation now of light industrial, and it's so zoned. but the area is predominantly residential. They would like to develop that for affordable housing for first-time home buyers, and consequently, I'm here to advocate for that, and I have made, I've attended a previous in-person meeting and online meeting and advocated for that land use. So I'm here tonight to do the same thing as necessary. So I'll conclude my comments now, and if there's any questions, I'll try to answer them.
Would you be kind enough to repeat the quadrants you said?
Yes, I was going to ask, for the record, could we?
Second Street to, so north is Second Street, south is?
Bounded on the north by 3rd Street, south by Rialto, west Lena Road, and east Tippecanoe.
Okay. Thank you very much.
And I participated in the online mapping exercise, and I noticed that my comments were recorded on that online mapping exercise.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Delshawn McClellan from SWRCC.
Southwest Regional Council of Carpenters. How you guys doing? I'm speaking on behalf of the general plan. I've been in a lot of meetings dealing with this. Again, my name is Delshawn McClellan. I'm a member of the Southwest Regional Council of Carpenters, which we have like 5,000 members that live in the vicinity of San Bernardino County. They work and recreate in the vicinity of this project. We believe that we'll be impacted by this environmental impact report of this project. The city should require the project to be built utilizing local and skilled trained workforce. The local hire and skilled trained workforce requirements reduces construction-related environmental impacts while benefiting the local economy. In a recent 2020 report titled Putting California on High Roads, A Jobs and Climate Action Plan for 2030, the California's Workforce Development Board concluded that investments in growing, diversifying, and upscaling California's workforce can positively affect returns on climate mitigation efforts. Moreover, just this year, the South Coast Air Quality Management District found that the use of local, state, certified apprenticeship programs and a skilled trained workforce and local hire can positively affect returns on climate mitigation efforts. Moreover, just this year, the South Coast Air Quality Management District found that use of local, state, certified apprenticeship programs can result in pollutant reductions that other cities have not, and other cities have not hesitated to apply skilled and trained workforce requirements for private development projects in the cities. Recently, the city of Hayward in Northern California adopted skilled and trained workforce requirements in its general plan and municipal codes. Local skilled and trained workforce requirements can boost economic development and mitigate transportation and greenhouse gas impacts, minimizing vehicles miles traveled. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Jim Mulvihill.
Good evening, Jim Mulvihill, resident, but my background's in planning. You've probably seen the notice in the paper this morning that the homeless count has been published. The point-in-time count takes place, should be annually, but because of the COVID, it was delayed for 2 years. The last one was in 2020. But the results were published. It was taken last week in February. There was 400 volunteers that spread out throughout the county, essentially with their laptops, and essentially taking account of the homeless population. And then they published this account, and this gives the overall breakdown. It's on page 16 and 17, but also broke down into subgroups, gender, family, and not, and so forth. What I want to point out is that what the paper said this morning is that the unsheltered population in the county. Now, the unsheltered population are the ones that you see on the streets and in the vacant lots and so forth. We have a sheltered population, but that's another story. But the unsheltered population in the county actually dropped by 1. We can say it's stabilized, but it dropped from 2390 to 2389, and that's good news. But San Bernardino doesn't have good news. The unsheltered population in San Bernardino increased 20%. From 823 to 992. And that's a pretty significant difference. If the county stabilized as a whole, and San Bernardino went up 20%. Now, what's 20%? Now, there are a couple jurisdictions that are over 20%. I think like Landers, virtually nobody lives there, so if one person shows up, the percentage is high. And the same thing for, I think, Hesperia. But they had like 19, and now they're up to 38, so they got a 100% increase. We're talking here about 823 in 2020 to 992 in 2022. That's a pretty significant difference. And although we aren't dealing necessarily with homelessness tonight, obviously that's the ` issue among citizens. Is homelessness. And we're redoing the general plan, and we should make note of that. That, in fact, we're kind of off the scales in terms of the number of homeless people. And also, too, the agency in the county called the Interagency Council on Homelessness, it's part of a system of 44 organizations that make policies for their individual counties and regions in the state. Interagency Council on Homelessness in San Bernardino County essentially involves the public health agency, involves the city, involves a number of nonprofits, a number of stakeholders. And I'm running out of time. At any rate, really the situation should be the focus of some study by the Interagency Council, number one, but also I think the city. What is the city's homeless policy?
I think your 3 minutes were up.
Yeah, I think you're right.
I'm sorry.
I'm pressing it. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we'll go into some staff and consultant introductions. The consultant is Woody. Okay.
Let's
and our
do it.
staff is?
Oliver Mojica. I have Stephanie with me, and I also have Travis from our staff. Thank
Okay.
you.
Who's going to do the chair pack review of tonight's agenda? We have, the agenda has been already set, but there's one new item that's on the agenda that we'll do after number 2 on here. It's not on here, but we will address it. It's called Neighborhood Strategy. Let us look at the project update. Woody?
And actually, I defer to, there was, this is the item that we talked about adding. Okay. And actually, it was maybe Mr. Rothschild's submittal and question. And maybe you can clarify the request for the item to be discussed, the issue that was raised, and then we can talk about how to approach that and address that issue.
Certainly. So there's been a lot of activity since our last meeting, and I just wanted to kind of take a quick check and make sure, we were on a good track to, to make a meaningful contribution to the general plan. Not only, make a contribution to ensure we're compliant with state law, but also to, the community vision. And, actually there's 2 parts of this. The first issue rose out of a 7th Ward meeting that occurred last month with Councilman Alexander. I think Mr. Rivas was there and would probably agree that the homeowners were not at all pleased to learn that there was a dollar store moving into their neighborhood. The specifics of this particular development I don't think are particularly relevant to our committee, but rather I want to understand how the general plan can be used to more effectively shape this type of development in our neighborhoods. While the residents were not objectionable to any commercial development, they were, up in arms about having this particular type of development in their neighborhood. So I really want to understand how with our remaining meetings, that we're going to be able to tackle this problem and build neighborhoods that are useful and acceptable to the residents. And sort of the second part of that is at the last council meeting, Mr. Tesher, you indicated that there may only be a handful of meetings remaining for this committee. And if that's in fact the case, I want to double check because we don't have a lot of time to get that work done.
If I may, with the general plan and the land uses, the general plan and/or the development code does not really address minimizing or addressing what I'll call social and economic issues. I think in that meeting that we had, we have to be careful when we label a particular use or business to a demographic of a customer. And so we have to be careful when we say shoppers like this shouldn't be in our neighborhood. And so that's, we do talk about compatibility, consistency, and those kinds of things in your general plan. And if you look at, we have a couple commissioners here, but when you look at in our resolutions, when there's findings, and the first one is consistency with the general plan. And usually what we'll do is we will identify a couple of the land use policies, and we'll say this is the goal, this is the policy, or what have you, and then we'll have a narrative of how it's compatible, to that. And so that's a good point to bring up. So as we start looking at those, as I mentioned earlier, so we have the goals, the policies, and then the programs, kind of that matrix that we'll have. If you now be mindful of that when we get to those parts of the general plan update, of this update, now you can look at it from that lens and see whether or not it could address what it is that.
So when in our schedule do we get to that phase?
Well, we still, it's a while still. I mean, we've, I don't know if Woody can.
Yeah, maybe I can jump in. There are actually two dimensions in terms of addressing the issue that you raised. Specific uses are addressed through the zoning code, the development code. We're probably a good 9 months to 12 months away with that. That also will address, there will be an administrative procedures section which addresses how the public is involved in development review and entitlement process as well. For the policies related to the land use that will address issues like compatibility, et cetera, we're looking at, well, there are a lot of things in play right now, which is the last comment you made. I'll come back to that in a moment. But assuming we move forward with the GPAC schedule, which we're looking to ways to do that. We will be looking at probably August or September, around that time frame, to be talking about those policies at that point in time, which will address land use compatibility. The first element, once we get through the land, well, jumping ahead on the agenda a little bit, but once we get through the land use plan, we will move into the goals and policy section of the plan as well. So that'll happen this year, bottom line.
And along those lines, one of the comments that came up during that meeting was the noticing, noticing of the community, the neighbors, and such. And you may be aware that we've increased. The council adopted an ordinance that before our requirements were that we notify residents, or not residents, property owners within 500 feet of the project in question. So that was modified. It's actually it's up to 1,000 feet, and then it also includes tenants. So what happens is typically we have a lot of absentee property owners, and so the public hearing notice goes to Montana or someplace, and the person that lives there or the business owner. So now with our noticing requirements, it will not only be the property owner, but if there's an apartment complex or there's a renter of a single family residence, they will receive a notice, as well as the local businesses, not just the property owner of the shopping center or whatever, but the actual tenants on the inside. So the goal is to to notify all of those in the surrounding area.
Sure. I didn't want to get into the specifics of that particular development, but rather, the sense that I took away from it is that the members of the community want a great deal of say in terms of, their neighborhoods. And so what I really want to make sure is that the general plan is able to take those, those concerns and what people want to see in their neighborhoods and implement it in such a way that, it lays out a plan for the city so that we know what types of businesses are appropriate. I don't want to get into dollar stores and demographics. That's not the point.
You're right.
The point is that, that particular neighborhood has certain needs, commercial needs, and that's a commercial, sector there. But it doesn't mean any commercial. It means certain types of commercial that are beneficial to neighborhoods. And that's really what I'm trying to get at, is that, we want to see the development and construction of neighborhoods that are mutually compatible and supportive of each other, as opposed to ones that may be somewhat divisive.
And let me again differentiate. That's why I brought up the development code, because it's the development code. The general plan by definition is general, we'll probably call it commercial use like neighborhood, but it won't list the very specific uses that fall within that category. The development code ultimately will, and that's next year.
So this exercise this evening, or the continuation of it, is kind of exactly what you're referring to. So as we look at the areas in the different wards, what's appropriate, in our areas that we're identifying here on the maps, and as an example, in that particular location, we have that shopping center that's kind of on the southwest corner there, that's been vacant like that for who knows how long. What's the vision for that? Exactly. And so there's a lot of those opportunities throughout the city, where there's large parcels or existing developments that need a little bit of love, and what do we want to do with those in the future?
Oliver?
Yeah.
Since you mentioned the fact that the property owners are notified, so I presume that there's an entitlement approval on that, on those stores?
Yes.
So there's a CUP involved?
There's a development permit for those.
Not a conditional use permit?
No, we have, if it's a permitted use and it's a vacant structure, and it's a vacant property, then you go through a public hearing process. If it's an existing building, you're just reoccupying it, then there isn't if it's a permitted use. If it's a conditionally permitted use, then it requires a CUP.
Right.
But that was just in that particular case, it was a general retail store. Retail's allowed in the commercial zone, so it was what made it a public hearing was it was a vacant lot, brand new building.
Just in my experience, what I find about these buildings, that they lack any design theme associated with a larger design plan for a shopping area. They're just kind of there by themselves, boring. They look boring and dull. So I mean, that's what all these stores lack. The design amenities that will at least embellish the building itself.
Okay. General Plan Committee business, the project update. Woody?
Yeah, let me very quickly, and this is just very generalized, if you see on the screen,
Woody, your mic? Your mic. There we go.
The mic. The screen indicates obviously our meetings. We will begin our discussion of the recommended land uses from your group here tonight. We're obviously not going to get through 7 wards tonight. As you can see that we have a few sites to discuss during the next few weeks. Our next meeting we will schedule for 3 weeks from now. Just note this is off our regular 2 or 4 week cycle, but June 9th, that's been confirmed for that date, and we'll pick up where we leave off tonight. And then we will schedule on a 2-week interval depending until we get through these maps and the plan maps themselves. And that will be your preliminary plan, and we'll talk more about that in a minute in terms of what we're identifying here as well. Then through June and through August, we'll be looking at quantifying, what that means, how many residential units, how much square footage, non-residential, et cetera. And we'll be looking at some very high-level impacts like general, what does this mean for traffic? What does it mean for climate change in terms of numbers, et cetera? And the intent then is that we'll bring that back to you and the findings and maybe have some public review of that. I'll come to that in a moment, of the conclusions to then take to a approval and basically vetting with the Planning Commission and City Council late this year et cetera. As we complete the land use plan map, we'll immediately get into just as Commissioner Rothschild was speaking about the goals policies for each of 14 elements that we have to cover of the general plan, which those are all listed in your handbook that was previously distributed to you. So that's where we are in terms of the overall project. I'll talk about public participation separately in a minute.
Alderman, you were going to review the status of the City Council's action to propose.
Oh, well, let me first talk about, one thing here. I just want to just indicate, because since we last were together, we've had a lot of public involvement, and our process has been to date to pivot to try to maximize public engagement and reaching out, and our numbers have substantially increased. We did have workshops, which many of you attended in the month of March in each of the wards, et cetera, and a citywide virtual workshop of the same exercise. Those workshops were basically in each ward. We asked folks to be basically looking at the land uses from the categories, the maps, et cetera. We'll be sharing that information with you tonight for your deliberations, et cetera. And we asked for their input, et cetera, for these maps. So that was a process that continued through the month of March as well. We also decided that even though it's not in our contract, we needed to work more closely with community organizations and community groups and schools. And so you will see here a list of events that were recently conducted during the month of April, which again expanded the outreach where we have maps sitting right over here in this box that I was finally delivered to tonight again. But similar, there are much more generalized kind of maps than we worked on with the community workshop process as well. And I've reviewed them initially, and there's pretty much concurrence with what we heard in terms of the direction and the ideas from the city workshops. And then very importantly, we also decided that it was important to work with the youth of the community. And you will see here a list of various school events, et cetera, that were conducted as recently as the last 2 weeks. Our last meeting just recently, on May 4th, we had 200 students involved in terms of doing mapping exercises as well. So we found that working through the CBOs expands the outreach as well as the schools and the input. We will be documenting, since we have time to obviously have more assimilation of that information. As soon as we get all that information documented, we'll be sharing that with you as well. So that will be coming up. But we found that working through these various community organizations, which again were not part of our contract, we've been able to expand and grow the outreach process fairly significantly over the last few weeks. And especially I'm happy about the youth and the teachers getting involved, because they're the future, if you will, for the community as well. So then I will throw it over to Oliver to talk about where we're going in public outreach and the results of City Council decision.
So as I indicated at our last meeting, we're presenting a request to expand the public participation part of the scope of work. The council elected not to expand those services, and so we will be working with Woody and his team to see how we will continue those going, whether it's the place work staff or ourselves. I don't anticipate that there will be a drop-off in the effort. It was just going to be a matter of who's conducting those meetings and those tasks. And so we'll be working with the PlaceWorks team to resolve that.
What were some of the reasons the council gave for not expanding?
They didn't really dive in. I mean, they're anxious to see the documents, completed and move forward. And that's just kind of where they left it.
Let me chime in. Explicitly, they said they didn't want to spend any funds from the general fund for this.
Okay.
I'll be explicit.
So they want to stay on track? They
Yes.
wanted to finish by the time that they...
Correct.
They said. Okay.
This also affects, the dilemma of whether it's city staff or consultant. There are certain aspects of this project which will require the consultant to be involved. Having city staff, for example, do what I'll call the safety when the technical staff is on our staff. The same thing on infrastructure and transportation. You kind of need those consultants to be involved. What we're doing is we're looking at the budget and the remaining dollars, and we're looking at some way to cover our costs through the process. And what it will mean is some of the items that the subcommittee reviewed will definitely not occur. We have right now, just so everyone's be aware of this, is that we have suspended all public outreach process except for this right now.
Did it seem to the staff that you needed to have more public outreach? What kind of public outreach?
Well, we hadn't really resolved that. I mean, I know that we've, in the meetings with this committee and also the Downtown Advisory Committee, I mean, the message was clear. You know, what are we doing? How, you know, why are there only, with no offense to those in the audience, and thank you for joining us, why are there only a handful of people here? You know, you have 200,000 plus residents, and you know.
So you wanted to increase the number of people participating.
Well,
although the consultant visited every single ward, and there were, at least twice, and there were multiple engagements available to them. So, but you wanted to increase the number of people participating.
That was the goal, and what do we do to increase that participation?
Okay.
We're going to work with staff to identify the essentials. To me, the number one essential is continuing working with you through the process because you are the official appointed advisory committee. We also have received notification from the state of California that they're expecting continuing public involvement through the housing element completion. So that's on the table, not budgeted. And we also, I'm looking forward to preparation of an environmental justice element that I would think needs some community input for environmental justice. So what we're doing is identifying what are the key essentials, and then we'll be looking at how we might be able, we have, for example, we have $11,000 left. I'll be very clear with everybody at the table on public outreach because what we did is we pivoted to do these other activities that I just mentioned earlier. Our contract only said meeting in 3 wards and bring the wards together. From the get-go, we had indicated we needed to pull together people from, we needed to meet in each ward. And then, again, I don't need to get all in the background on this as well, but there are going to be some solutions we're going to be looking forward to. There will be less bells and whistles than had been anticipated, but there are kind of essential mandates that indeed engage the community that's essential as well.
So from this point on, then you're just going to look into with each other to see what you can do within the scope that you've been outlined. Does anyone have any questions or comments? Then I move that we receive and file the update on the outreach activities.
And if we may also note that Committee Member Bell has joined us. Welcome.
Okay. Our task for the evening and the next few evenings getting together is to really spend some time thinking about what we heard from the community and beginning to make recommendations for the various areas of the city that we have talked about previously, that you back in your, seems like forever, February meeting, I think it was your February meeting, when you actually looked at the maps on the table to begin to look at those areas that had opportunity for change. So we have presented with you a number of pieces here tonight that are what I refer to as resources to use. You have copies of these in front of you. If it is appropriate, if we want to see things in detail, we can, like we did in that meeting, walk around the maps here, et cetera. Those are working maps, which are a little bit different than what's presented in front of you, so you'll see hand-marked up copies on those as well. But the various pieces you have for consideration, first you have a map of each of the wards, and on that map you will see dash lines around areas. So for example, the gentleman who spoke, his sub-area that he was talking about is on the map. It's number 1J. So each of the sub-areas are areas that we will chat about tonight. We'll hopefully get through Ward 1 at least to get the rhythm of this going, and then move on to the other wards. we're prepared to do Ward 1 and Ward 2. I think just because it's our first night doing it, we'll be happy to get through Ward 1 tonight as well. But you'll see on here basically a letter, a number and a letter. The number in all cases is the ward number. The letter on here then corresponds to, you also have copies of the tables. I think I've got a copy of this up here. Yes, we do. On the left-hand column of the table is a reference to the ward, the sub-area that's identified upon the map. And then also on that is you will see information in the second column about what the existing zoning is for that property. So if there's some question about, well, what is it today in terms of the land use designation in the city, et cetera. In the middle, you will see the list of ideas that came through the public process. Now, this came through the workshops that we talked about here. For those who, as the gentleman indicated, online comments that we have received as well on the online workshop, indicated our online exercise is still open until May 27th. And we're sending out another social media post I believe this week or next couple of days about it's closing soon, so last chance for people to get their input in as well. So this middle is again what we heard from the public. And then the right-hand column for your consideration as well is we worked with city staff around the table, et cetera, and a fair number of people were involved in looking at what the public had said and interpreting what the public had said and coming to with what was for your consideration and discussion, preliminary ideas about what we would distill out of the public process that would seem to make some sense in terms of a possible land use for the areas as well. So what we are going to do is walk through this. I've got a format for this in a minute, is to walk through this and ask you to, for each of the areas here, to basically say, does that land use, that recommendation from staff, or are there alternatives, et cetera, that make sense for that staff that you would recommend as well. And that will be the let's see, the process. Do I have one more here? We also have with you, and I've got the large versions of this on the table, and you have printouts of this. These are the various categories that when we are looking to identify a use for a site, we again worked with in all the community workshops to remind you, we asked people to point to a picture, if you will, and on the online site, it was the same exercise to point to an image that relates to what they would see would be the best use on a piece of particular property. We stayed away from things like, densities and building heights, et cetera. We thought people relate more to the character and the form of what's there. These are not intended to be architectural, but they're intended to be the basic, scale and understanding of those as well. And so we'll continue with these as we, again, go to the recommendations. Our ultimate land use categories on the map will probably be different, but what we're looking for is the basic use ideas from you here tonight. So any questions about our process first?
I just have one. I find these kind of dense and hard to read. Several meetings ago, I think back when we first looked at the maps, I asked about, are we able to view these in a GIS format interactively online? Were we able to get that done?
How do we handle that, Woody? I don't know if our website has that capability.
Let us do some additional checking on that, Commissioner.
Yeah, it would be great to be able to zoom into an area and, take a closer look at it. Plus,
the other thing is
a lot of these, it's hard to really tell what streets and exactly where it is.
They're zoomable, even in this format.
Okay.
If you do it, just click the enlarge, the zoom at the top of the bar at the top. Okay. And you can change the zoom.
Okay.
But
you can use it with this.
In real time, like what?
In real time, you can zoom it.
And see what is actually there, what type of buildings, you can see that?
You'd have to go to Google Earth for that purpose.
All right.
And we can do that.
So were these done in using a mapping application?
These are GIS produced maps.
I mean, is this an Esri product?
It's GIS. It's
yeah, I mean, if we could, get into that, that would be wonderful, in just a read-only mode.
Yeah, sure. But yeah, because these are all GIS format. These are just PDF copies of them, et cetera. But what's online, again, you can zoom in. The version that you were sent, you could zoom in on the computer as well. And what you're going to see here are, in case, some enlarged ones when we talk about the sub-areas, because I went ahead and did that for the purpose of our discussion here tonight. Okay, so let's begin with, I've tried to group these by like, if you will, characteristics and like issues for simplicity, et cetera. So on the screen, you will see 3 areas. There are 3 areas that we at least generally characterize as being corridors. Up at the top, we have Baseline. Off to the left, we have the Mount Vernon 5th Street area. And on the right, you have the Waterman area. In those areas, basically the issue that was associated with, and when we asked people to provide input, was the fact in many cases there are some issues and concerns about vacant storefronts. There are concerns about, and especially Mount Vernon area, some vacant properties also on Mount Vernon, on Waterman as well, as you will see on the screen, et cetera. So those areas, just for your reference on your tables here, are 1A, 1B, 1C, and 1D. So again, Mount Vernon's 1A, 5th is 1B, which is the horizontal east-west portion of that circle up there, Baseline 1C, and 1D. Now let me indicate there's an asterisk also on here just to explain so you understand why the asterisk is there. It means that that street actually occurs in 2 wards. So you will see this come up again when we talk, because you don't make land use decisions based upon a ward line in the middle of the street, et cetera, because what happens on one side of the street and the other side of the street should be reasonably consistent with one another as well. So on those areas, you will see that things that we heard consistently throughout all the public input we received, we heard some ideas that this should be a mixed-use corridor. So, and if you go back to your, I've got smaller versions of your graphics on here as well. But when you go back to those, when they were looking at a mixed-use corridor, the idea was this, when they were using that terminology, that a piece of property could be developed with 100% for commercial, or it could be developed with ground floor commercial with housing on top, or it could be built with 100% residential on that area. So that was the purpose of the mixed-use category as it was described for the folks who provided the input. You will note also here, at least in 3 of the areas, that the opportunity for neighborhood commercial serving uses was also emphasized from the public as well. And then on Waterman, there were places where there were separately called out places for residential medium. So the recommendations that came up through discussion with staff and for your consideration was, yes, to create basically a designation here for this area that would allow that mixture of uses, again, as seen here. But with a specific policy to require a concentration of ground level commercial at the key intersections. So you cluster it. You may not have enough economic support for 100% of the length, and you don't, to be commercial, but where you really want to do is to aggregate and cluster it at the major intersections, et cetera. And then also to, as a policy, to indeed look at ways and strategies to encourage neighborhoods or commercial uses within these corridors, because each of these corridors does have a relationship to a residential neighborhood, for example, Baseline to the north and to the south, Mount Vernon, et cetera, east-west, et cetera. And so the notion, back to, I guess, I think, some of the concerns, Commissioner Rothschild, about neighborhoods serving commercial and uses and what are appropriate, I think that begins to suggest that kind of direction of neighborhood commercial uses themselves. Let's see, is there anything else? And I think those are the recommendations for those 4 areas that we would like your feedback for and get your sense whether that's a good recommendation or you see something else that you would recommend.
Woody, do we want to use the maps here on the table?
We can do that or look at these. I don't know what's more convenient for people.
Well, what would be the pleasure of the committee members?
This is what I get when I zoom into the PDF.
Should we huddle around the table and look at the maps? Is that
resolution versions of those online?
There we go. Let's pause and walk around.
They did it again. No, I understand. Thanks. We can assemble around here. We can take the notes and assemble around here. And I can take this because we'll go back and forth. So as I indicated, what we have on here is, I said these are working maps. And so the information, though, is what you'll see in black for what the community identified, which is listed here in the center column as well. The blue are the existing zoning categories for these areas as well. And then the black outlines the areas. So for what we also have done, have annotated on here, potential, if we were beginning to cluster commercial, you know, again, that sort of policy of the potential locations at the major cross intersections, et cetera, for here. So, for example, on Baseline, and then the notion of we do have a core here on Mount Vernon and 50th, which is a neighborhood core. There is an existing specific plan there, calls for a thematic character of that area that reflects the neighborhood themselves. And then here along, if you will, Waterman, again, the notion we have, the northern portion, we already have a specific plan, which is the Waterman specific plan, which calls this out as a mixed-use corridor. So indeed, the staff's recommendation is to continue that. Again, it actually goes down to right about here. And then the notion was to, again, to sort of continue that mixed-use opportunity further to the south here.
Isn't that 5th Street, by the way, not 50th Street?
Yeah, 5th Street. 5th Street, I said 50th.
There's a specific plan for Mount Vernon corridor. Is that gone?
Right here, this area right here.
Right, is that still intact? Or
That's still intact, yeah.
Same with Baseline specific plan?
There's
a, I thought there was a sort of an Art Deco.
I don't think
Good specific plan for Highland. Highland had a specific plan also.
There's not one for Baseline.
On Baseline, I thought.
Baseline was part of the Waterman.
Right between, what is it, the freeway and just beyond E Street, there used to be a specific plan for Highland. Oh, Highland, not Baseline. Sorry.
Baseline.
Yeah, this is Baseline.
No, it's not Baseline because they have an Art Deco kind of a, no? Doesn't ring a bell? Okay.
Yeah, it's not in the list of specific plans we have.
So just out of curiosity, this mixed use, how many people have actually taken advantage of mixed use on Waterman?
Well, again, remember what mixed use means. It means
I know what it means.
100% residential. It could be 100% commercial. It means a category in which you have flexibility regarding the type of
Right, so
use.
how long has it been in place?
It has not been in place.
It has not. I thought he just said that.
The specific plan, the northern portion is part of the Waterman.
Right, so in that specific area, how many projects have come forward as a mixed? Zero. That's what I said.
Since 2016.
Because it's very difficult and it's driven by basically
The economy.
Yeah, economy, right.
So the question is, if it's not mixed use, which allows commercial, residential, or housing, what would it be? Industrial?
No, not industrial.
Okay. Okay. I'm going because again, the thought is.
I mean, mixed use is a great thought, but the fact that if nobody comes forward, then there's an option though. Well, I guess the option is all residential mixed, a combination of. It can't all be commercial, can it?
No.
No, that's what I thought.
It could, but it never will be. And so the other part too is.
I'm looking for flexibility.
So that's what we're doing. That's what that designation does. It doesn't say you have a mixed use on a site necessarily. Basically say it's the district, because that's what corridor is, and you can choose to have 100% residential. It can be all residential, or it can be all commercial, or it could be, again, that mix, vertical.
Well, it gives the greatest flexibility.
That's what it does. Yeah. I think that's why you saw a lot of public, because again, if you notice in here, there are plenty of places in the city where the mixed-use corridor comes up in multiple wards. You know, I think the sense was, again, there's not enough economy to create 100% commercial. These parcels are shallow, so they're going to be limiting how much commercial you can really develop on those as well. So let's go to something that provides the maximum flexibility, and I believe that was why we heard so much about having that mixed-use classification as a recommendation.
And you don't revitalize a corridor parcel by parcel. And so the idea is, again, if we keep the, the goals, policies, and programs, so we say, well, okay, we want mixed use on this corridor. What does that mean, right? It's more than just a land use, commercial and residential. Now we talk about densities, so and building height, and so if you have somebody in the development world that's looking to do something, what we're trying to do is encourage lot assemblage. And so if you drive up and down Waterman between like 3rd and even Highland, you get a lot of these older, fragmented,
Transmission service.
you got all that kind of stuff, and a lot of them are been in ownership for a long time, and so folks start getting the retirement age, and Junior doesn't want to be a mechanic or own that tow yard or whatever the case is, and so the developers go in and they will assemble lots because they know that at the end of the day we could do a larger project.
And plus you've got a zone for residential too.
Right.
Isn't that a problem though when you have residential zoning and people are in there and all of a sudden they're putting something commercial or industrial or something right next to them, then they're unhappy. So you have unhappy residents because they don't want that.
Well, a lot of these abut residential areas. So you are, especially on the west side, which most of this is, on Waterman, is adjacent to a residential neighborhood as well. These are all adjacent to residential. These are all adjacent to residential.
Just an example, all these warehouses that are going in right now, and they're right in the mix of subdivisions.
Yeah, and that's
which is bad. The people are not happy about it, and you start mixing residential with some of the other mixes, and you're going to have unhappy residents. How do you handle that?
We also have development standards to deal with how the transition and the interface occurs, absolutely, because there are ways to do that in terms of property setbacks, landscape treating, et cetera. That's probably not an issue, again, along here on the west side, but because we are adjoining residential. But even with that, you do have because the scale of development will be a little bit differently. And so what you are doing is you have development standards that call for the transitions. You may have HAS standards. We have, for example, the ability, let's say if you have a 3-story building, you're adjacent to a 1-story, you require that 3-story building have a vertical setback, et cetera, so that you minimize the impact, on solar access, maintain solar access to those adjoining residences as well.
How about a different question? Developers have come forward and tried to introduce mixed use.
Yes, they do. But
and just out of curiosity, what are the shortfalls? What do they find? I mean, there's a reason why developers are not doing the mixed use.
Density.
Density is the issue. So obviously then, in all these, later on, policy...
We're going to need sufficient density, absolutely.
Okay, so then density, we'd have to deal with, I'm sure they're going to ask for a reduction in parking, probably setbacks, scale, so that's sort of the reason why it hasn't worked.
Well, that's where cities or jurisdictions that don't have standards. A lot of you can go to. I'm going to venture that 90% of the cities, if you went to a city hall and you said, I want to do a mixed-use project, and how many units would park, all the questions that you said, most of them are going to say, we have to figure it out. What do you propose? And then you get variances, you get all these other things because it's not very many cities plan for it.
And again, it goes back, and I'll go there. This is a real mixed-use project, 3 stories, 1 level commercial, 2 levels of housing, FAR of 1.8. It is a project that has all code-required parking, sufficient parking on site. So it is feasible. Obviously, this is a much bigger density project, but I think if we're talking about vertical mixed use on these corridors, you're going to be more like this than you are like this, because you probably don't want something that scale immediately adjacent to a single-family neighborhood. And you'll probably find a lot of opposition if you do.
Something like this is going to need more pedestrian.
Well, this is very pedestrian oriented. I can show you what that is. The key on vertical mixed use for the retail is you want it to be in a place where there's continuity of ground level retail in the district. I'll give you the perfect example. In Pasadena, at the Holly Street mixed-use project, which is across near City Hall in Pasadena, but north of Colorado Boulevard, which was built, and it's also over a transit station, but the transit wasn't that was built. But anyway, over a transit station, the ground level retail has never been successful. The housing immediately was filled and occupied. Why was the ground level? It was isolated by itself. It was an island. It was a single building all by itself. If that same building had been down on Colorado, 2 blocks to the south, it would have succeeded because there's a continuity along the street of that pedestrian character and that activity. So that's very important to look at in terms of feasibility. So what we're finding this era of mixed-use development is it's really the residential that subsidizes the commercial. It used to be the other way around, but it's really the residential that subsidizes the commercial in terms of making a feasible project. So, et cetera.
So on your map here,
thank you.
So one of the things I've seen, traveling in other cities, particularly if you want to encourage people to use public transit, which is a long-term, I think, goal and objective for us. We've got two major transit corridors. We've got Waterman and we have Baseline. And so people tend to want to gravitate to areas where they can have easy access to public transit. So particularly this intersection right here, where you've got good connectivity north-south and east-west, you really want to have high-density mixed use in this area, because then people have, they have access to that public transit along those routes, directly from their house. So, I see you have mixed-use village here. Is that what that says? Is that the same?
No, that's what the existing zoning is for this.
Oh, okay, because you've got mixed-use center on here, which I think would sort of be what you're looking for in that area.
Yeah, the difference in the corridor versus the center in terms of the definition. The center is a little bit different classification. It is a project that requires square sites, big properties that have depth, and you don't have those here. Because you're then able to have, for example, commercial frontage with residential to the rear.
Northeast Waterman Baseline is a large site.
You're right, this one right there. Yeah. That could be ideal. So what you would think would be, that would be a mixed-use center.
Exactly.
Well, the corridor, that'd be the mixed-use corridor.
Exactly.
Your thoughts, committee? We agree. Input?
I think.
Okay. So I'm going to note here, probably need another color, put a circle around it, mixed-use center.
Where that shopping center's at?
Yeah.
Market's at?
Yeah.
And then the mixed-use corridors for the balance of the areas. Again, the notion, that's why...
Well, the corridors would be Waterman and Baseline. I'm not sure about the other streets.
No, I'm saying the corridor.
Yeah, so Waterman and Baseline definitely
Yes.
corridors, yeah.
Oh, what about, Mount Vernon?
Yeah, I think Mount Vernon's a corridor as well.
Okay.
What is the plan there?
Okay, for mixed-use area, which comes first, transportation or the residential?
Mixed
Transportation. So I can't talk about, actually what here, but in Washington, D.C., what you saw was communities built up around metro stops. Yeah. Subway stops, they were there, and communities just blossomed around them because they were...
the SBX theory.
Yeah.
It hasn't worked.
Well, I mean, Washington took, 40 years for that to develop.
That's a long time for SBX to...
It is. These are long-term projects,
Okay.
no doubt.
You're talking about a city that was developed 100 years ago. I'm from there. And that...
Well, no, the metro's well outside of Washington, D.C.
But let me just, we're talking about, again, density to actually support the transit and regenerate it. Let me also indicate that the photograph back here of the mixed use is not anywhere close to a transit, again, because it's a creation of a district in an area. And it's a very successful project, to say the least, as well. And you can look at mixed use gets developed in multiple places also with the particular purpose to get people to, if you have, let's say, mixed use within a district, you can walk to the Starbucks.
Right.
It reduces your trip. You can walk to the grocery store. It reduces the trip. You can walk to areas. It doesn't totally eliminate the car use, but what it does is it reduces the trip use, which has a positive climate change benefit, as well as consumption energy and all the other benefits.
And I think if you look at, generationally where people are headed,
yes.
Car ownership is on the decrease, and people are looking for other ways to access the services they need.
Have you been on our streets? Have you been on our freeways?
I'm talking generationally, not specific here, but Long-term, car manufacturers will tell you that
Well,
they see selling fewer cars in the future.
What
than we have in the past.
I'm hearing though is the younger generations, they're not interested in cars right now, but when they're reaching the 30s and stuff, they're finding that they are getting into cars.
I don't think that's true, but go ahead. I have a question here. Here. There's a lot of work been done on Waterman. How about East Street? Is this Fifth?
No, we're south, we're not up there yet. We're coming up there.
Is this Inland? Is that Inland Center?
This is, Inland Center's down here.
Okay.
Yeah, they're working on the basement.
We're not in our ward, not in our ward. Not yet. Not yet, come, we'll be addressing it.
And the stadium is?
Down here.
Okay, well, all along here, you've got...
That's the downtown plan.
Oh, the downtown. Okay.
We're not touching that.
Okay, I understand.
What's the difference between mixed-use center and mixed-use corridor? I don't really see.
Let me do a little sketch here. A mixed-use center is generally a square site that has depth. These are shallow parcels. So the difference here is what you're doing is by having on let's say a mixed-use center, what you can do is mix it up on the site. So for example, you may have commercial along the street frontage, and then you may have housing back here, something like that. A corridor is basically, it's basically like that photograph where the building was, the vertical building, that one right there.
One business deed.
Yeah, it's basically one business deed. So it either be...
literally one,
because you don't have enough depth to have parking and all the other things you need to support that use.
So we're saying this is going to be a mixed-use center.
That would be a center up there.
Yes, good.
Again, the notion also with this, I think, unless I hear differently, is the idea about encouraging neighborhood serving uses within these areas makes a lot of sense. So let's go.
Well, to me, I would walk on Waterman if the walkway was pleasant enough. If there were trees, if it was a short distance, and I was only going from here to here, and it was a short distance, I would walk.
There's something called...
If there's sun-baked and whatever, I would not walk it.
There will be...
If there are homeless people, I would not walk it.
As we create the, we talked about development standards earlier. As we basically take each of these areas, and let's say we have a category called mixed-use corridor. There will be obviously, some of these issues about transition, scale, density with the adjoining areas, et cetera. But we'll also have some description about the intended characteristics of the street frontage. So continuous street canopy, which we're going to have anyway, citywide, because of the heat gain issue and the heat canopy issue, and the way with climate change legislation, that's going to be an absolute essential.
As long as it broke it up, it's not one whole sidewalk.
And no palm trees, trees that actually create shade.
And what is here? What is this Fifth and Mount Vernon?
Right.
Is this designated for what?
Mixed use. We're saying mixed use in that area.
Mixed use also.
Okay, so let me move, we have the three corridors. Let me move to then this area actually, Jimmy, you were talking about this. Okay. Okay. This area D and E, this is sub-area, I forgot my sub-area maps. This is on your map 1E in terms of your categories here. 1E. Now this is, let me just indicate here, this is something that we are reflecting basically what is in the downtown plan, what we've seen approved in the downtown concept for the downtown area. The downtown plan takes this area right here, south of this area. So this is 1E right here. And you will see that the west, currently today, the west portion is designated for zone for commercial. The east portion is commercial office. What the downtown plan has said is basically turning this area, they're calling it their entry district as a part of the downtown plan. So the note is what they're going to do is intend to load up density in this area. Less dense here, so your highest density will be, of course, down here. But there'll be some density here, and the intent is mixed use in terms of the density. But in this area that the ground floor would be required to have commercial, so not a freestanding residential project, et cetera. So what the recommendation here is for this area is similar concept, probably a slightly less density, but to continue this gateway flanking D and E Street up to baseline. So then here you have, in effect, this node that we've been talking about here tied into it, so that this would continue this connectivity, baseline, et cetera, down into the area. Thoughts?
So would they see D Street or E Street being the main corridor?
They had both D and E that's coupled, I believe, in their plan that they're looking at.
So we're talking about downtown area, right?
Yeah, well, we're north, this is north of the immediately north of the downtown area. So this is sort of like the missing piece. If they had extended the downtown area, they probably would have extended up here to create the continuity.
I think that's
with
good.
The concept in this area.
So you're saying have the ground floor like...
It would be, this is a case, this is a case where you would require the, like the, back to the photograph, where you would require that the ground floor have commercial in it.
And then the
It
top.
could be an office, I mean, it could, it could be retail, it could be office, but it's basically housing above, but not a freestanding housing unit. Because again, if you look at what's there today, it's predominantly commercial today in terms of the uses and vacant properties there, et cetera. So really what it is infill, repetition of that area.
Yeah, I think that's good. And then you get people who could live here and walk down and
There's that continuity.
that.
And when you see the ideas down here, some interesting ideas growing from this area too.
That's good.
Okay, everybody okay with that? For the
So when
gateway?
you say medium to low, what's the story count? Is that 2 stories or?
That's something we want to talk with you about later. Right now,
If I'm not mistaken, I think we designated this as 2 or 3 story.
2 or 3 stories max. Okay.
Right here.
So the idea would be the same.
Yeah, 2 stories would seem too.
The downtown is
Well, it's going to need to be 3 stories if it's going to be mixed use.
But that's what.
Because you can't financially, doesn't work at 2 stories.
Well, I guess then later we'll have to look at development standards and maybe do a step of some type to soften it from the street level.
Yes. Well, and also because you got primarily single family
Right.
in Houston, most of that. So you definitely look at, there's enough depth here to play with in terms of requiring that vertical setback. In fact,
What? Okay, we're talking about that. What about parking?
That's another issue.
that's another issue and another topic. Right now, we're assuming all parking's provided.
Okay.
But that's controversial now, though.
Yeah, that's a separate discussion, and that's a separate discussion for the downtown committee coming up in their next meeting. I understand they're going to be talking about parking. So let's see where that goes with them, because that may set the tone for what we're thinking about parking here, et cetera. So let me go to, there are then 3 areas on the map that we refer to as centers. So the first one is the area around the transit station right here. And then I'll do that one first. Then there's this commercial property, which I think we already talked about. We'll come back to that one. But this area around the transit station. What we heard from the public there was, let's take the opportunity to do something around that area, around that transit station. Renovate the transit station. It could be a food hall. It could be something really special that attract people from the area. And so if we're going to do that, let's create a district, not just that site itself.
You're talking about that's the MetroLink?
I'm sorry?
That's the railroad station.
Yeah.
The MetroLink area.
So the notion here, and again, this is 1F on your menu, on your chart here, was to create this depot district, mixed use. It could be horizontal or vertical, so you may have some commercial here. Over here, you might have some residential, some higher density residential, et cetera. There's a whole strip of vacant lots in here, et cetera. So the opportunity to treat this entire area as a special district that's a mix of commercial related to the depot uses, those special uses of the depot.
Food courts.
And add some housing, maybe duplexes, triplexes, or some slightly higher densities.
Now, East Street, on this one, East Street is where?
East over here.
Okay.
You're way over here. That's the Santa Fe depot.
Gotcha. I'm thinking about the transit center, excuse me.
because this great building that has that opportunity to do something kind of special.
And I think that area would be great since people are going to be going in and out. And if they're hungry, they have retail, shopping, food, anything.
It would be nice to attract people from like food. If there's something attractive here, you could get people coming from LA.
Yes, like a get off.
They have a reason to come to San Bernardino.
Right.
That reason is it should be here.
It has, it's unique architecturally, if you will, and so you think about capitalizing on that as well as special. Okay, so the Depot District. So the other center is this one, and I think we already talked about. This one may be an easy one. This is the Outlet Mall on the east side of Waterman, south of the project that has been built. This is a part of the Waterman specific plan as well, and it also is called out in the specific plan as a mixed-use village. So the thought here was on that site, just like we talked about having a mixed-use center on that site as a destination, if that makes sense for everybody.
Absolutely.
Okay. Anybody have an issue with that?
No.
Where is that at?
It's on Waterman South. Your baseline's up here. The residential project National Corps has been doing is up here, just immediately south of that.
With the Telco, Burger King, Kmart Center there.
Okay, let's move on to our next. We're moving through these. Good. Then there are a number of what I call miscellaneous areas, including the gentleman's here, et cetera. Let's first talk about the area 1H on your menu here. It's the area north of the airport. This area is, there's a specific plan in preparation for this. Oliver, what's the status of this? Oliver, Travis?
All right, guys, let's get
Sorry. The airport area specific plan, it's not adopted, is it?
Oh, no, it's not even close.
Oh, okay. Its recommendation, just to give you a clue, is to designate the area, as you see here, it's called the Gateway Specific Plan. So the area there is that line right there, which I think is, what, 9th Street?
Fifth, I think.
5th Street. That area is basically called out a Gateway Specific Plan. What that specific plan calls for, please correct me if I'm wrong, is primarily industrial.
Correct.
With commercial at intersections or supporting commercial.
That's correct.
Okay, so the ultimate specific plan will be probably a separate public discussion, but what this is intended to do is replicate what basically is on that specific plan.
I have a question. Airport is now open for inbound, outbound, regular flights.
There's some regular commercial flights in and out of the airport now. Other thoughts? Does that make sense?
Just one question. Is there an airport influence zone
Over
plan?
here.
I mean,
Over here or something like
it's
that.
only over here? Only in this area? Not up in this area?
I don't believe, because of the air flight, the noise contours, which I think we had earlier, just fly over here, the flight paths are over here. We'll verify that. This may be why they went industrial.
Yeah, because you got flights coming in from two directions.
Yeah, oh, that's right.
So, and it
I
depends on...
presume that that's part of it, and that's why we went industrial.
Yeah, I mean, you want industrial all along this entire, north side.
That's out of the city, so
Yeah.
this is the one place in the city. Yeah.
So we're saying industrial?
Industrial, yeah, airport-related industrial.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, so I will, that's IH, note that. Okay, then let me jump over to the gentleman's request here earlier tonight. This is the area that, just convenient, Louis, we didn't mark that after the request to come. We also had input on this. This is an area, current zoning, to start with the current zoning. What you'll see, I should indicate that what's on the underlying map are the existing uses. So you see today that this is primarily residential with some vacant parcels in the area, abutted by industrial on the east, industrial on the south, county yard on the west. The current zoning is for this strip along the street to be commercial. This L-shaped portion of it to be industrial. And then the balance to be what's called residential urban, which I think is about 8 units per acre, unless I'm wrong, in the residential urban, right? Is that correct?
And what location is that?
This is, these are the site that the gentleman requested. So this is Rialto, I believe?
No, third.
Third. This is third. This is Rialto.
Correct.
Okay.
County Yard, that means...
And this is Tippecanoe.
Is that fleet that parks there at the county yard?
Yes.
So it's their
There's some
facilities or structures?
ugly stuff there.
Yeah.
So the gentleman, we incorporated, because we took what you had done on the social pinpoint, and recommended the residential for the entirety of the area.
Not particularly the entirety, just everything. You know, we recognize that this Third Street frontage may have commercial potential, and it does have some commercial use, and some residential and quite a few vacant parcels. This is Second Street here.
Right.
This is predominantly residential, and this is on both sides, as you can see, with scattered vacant lots. This area, this is Rialto, quite sure.
Rialto's right here.
Okay.
Oh, that's Rialto then, where your thumb is.
And,
Oh, it is, okay.
And then this is, I don't recall.
Shepherd, what is that called?
Oh, yeah, Harry.
Shepherd, it is Shepherd.
Right. So, at any rate, and then south of Rialto is a fairly contemporary subdivision here, as you can see. Some scattered single family, a mobile home park, and this may be vacant, possibly. But as I mentioned, Montebello Housing, my client, their mission is to build affordable housing for first-time buyers of the low and moderate income. And because of the underlying land use designation of light industrial, in fact, I think the zone classification...
The zoning is commercial here, is in this L-shaped portion industrial,
right,
and in this square residential urban.
Right.
Well, they're of the opinion, and I share it also, in view of the fact that this is predominantly residential along the Second Street corridor and contiguous to this relatively new subdivision here, plus the mobile home development. You know, I don't think it's likely that an industrial developer is going to try to come in and acquire all these pieces.
Is there an industrial building right there in that area, Oliver, right now?
No, there's.
In the blocks, no?
Not in that square there.
South of Harry Shepherd, there's industrial. And of course, this is institutional.
Just out of curiosity, your group doesn't mind that you're bordered by 3 technically industrial?
No.
No?
Because their attitude is if they could develop affordable housing, you know, there has to be housing created for the workforce.
Sure.
And this is a logical place to do so because it's already predominantly residential.
And the fact that if the airport intensifies and industrial intensifies, that they would still be okay with their residential product in that location?
Oh, yes.
Only because I see residential people in that area, and I could see why I complain about the increase of the airport and the industrial. And yet, you know, obviously they knew about it, but you know they chose to buy purchase a property there.
It wasn't what you would call a premeditated purchase. It was a donation by the Rose.
Oh no, right? No, I totally I get that, but I'm just saying that let's say we leave it as residential.
Mm-hmm.
But knowing that in the future the airport is just going to increase in flights and this industrial, and so at that time these people are going to have to know exactly what they buy into.
Exactly, you're correct.
They'll end up selling.
I got a question. If that's residential, how did this suddenly become industrial? Who's owned it now? Who changed its owner?
The current designation. The current designation is industrial.
The current.
But yeah, the current zoning is
residential
industrial.
at one time.
The current zoning is industrial.
But it must have been residential at one time.
Yeah, those homes there have been around for a while also.
I suspect it might have been A1 zone at one time.
Because there's an industrial just right up the street, right in here, right? And over here on this side?
What's happening is obviously the industrial is moving
Yeah.
in this direction.
I understand. It's just that it just all of a sudden kind of picked through there
Yeah.
and called it industrial for whatever reason. Like
Well, it's,
planning.
so if you can imagine the process that you're going through now, when we're looking at corridors, it's like, well, okay, we've got some of these areas we want to redevelop. And so at some point, there's going to be a transition of land uses, what's appropriate for that area, regardless of what your opinion is on a particular type of use. And so we have an airport here that's going to intensify, clearly.
Sure.
We've got industrial development that's happening all around, right? That's may or may not go away in the near future. And so, again, if we're looking 30, 50 years from now, you know, what's likely to happen, you know, in that area. And so do we make the rest of it match industrial to what's already industrial here?
Well, that was sort of a logical move.
Now,
Around the airport.
there's the Inland Valley Development Authority. Don't they control the land use?
No.
Not there.
Not here.
No.
What are the boundaries of the IVDA?
The Gray Park?
But they've also been looking at the warehousing here. They've been improving that. They've been planning with the Texas firm. Yeah.
I thought it was all on the airport.
So your thoughts? We really have two choices on the table. One is to retain the industrial and anticipate that this will be designated for the future. So if a property owner come in, is basically the permitted use would be industrial, or to allow, as the gentleman had suggested, his company suggested, creating a designation that allows housing.
I wouldn't allow housing around an airport. I think that's a loss.
Yeah, that's a bad idea. But kind of what I look at here, and I don't want to, say anything bad about the proposed project, but I'm looking for, how do we develop a neighborhood here? Can we develop a viable neighborhood that's got, groceries and services so that, people aren't driving across town, to get their
I assume that's
services?
what that commercial strip is, right? So that, okay.
So, that's kind of what I'm looking for is, can we develop this into a little walkable neighborhood?
There's got to be enough density there to support.
Exactly. And so that's the problem, is that when you've got, these pockets of just stretches of nothing but houses, then people have to get in cars and drive, and that just creates all the other problems. So that's my only concern, and it's not about this particular property or that particular zoning.
If you go to residential, I would suggest that you don't designate this strip for commercial, because nobody's going to build commercial on a shallow parcel strip. No one. What I would suggest you do is, if you consider the gentleman's recommendation, is you would call this, we have a category here somewhere called residential village. Residential village is intended to have some of that supporting retail use. So what it would require is some kind of master plan, site plan that integrates the commercial in a way that those neighborhoods serving uses themselves. So I said that's the residential direction if you go for residential. The other alternative, again, is to say this is an area that should be industrial for the future.
That's the way I would look at it.
Let me make another comment. Montebello Housing mission, as I said, is to build affordable housing. Now, given the practical realities of this committee and the city council making the ultimate decisions, if in the final analysis it was most appropriate to retain the industrial land use classification, that wouldn't be the end of the world for Montebello Housing. What I think I would recommend to them is then accept that, come to the city and say, can we swap out this vacant parcel, which we can't develop for, a like piece of city-owned property to build affordable housing. And if that's doable, that they would be happy with that.
I don't know if that a negotiation like that could take place in this process.
No, not in this process, but just if that opportunity is available, no contract or commitment would be required. If it would just be doable, if the city owns enough other vacant residential parcels that would be suitable for affordable housing, they'd be happy with that.
Yeah, I don't see any problem with, doing residential here. Like I said, I kind of favor your suggestion, which is make it part of a planned neighborhood.
Isn't commercial, industrial more valuable, the land more valuable than residential? And I imagine whenever that gets developed, that they would pick that up with surrounding parcels.
I guess one of the other questions is whether this would become, depending upon what happens up here outside of the city, is you're already beginning to see industrial fill in up there.
This island.
All in here. And so the question is, does this become an island?
Yeah, that's
If it's
the problem,
residential.
it's becoming an island.
Well, it's okay if it's an island, if it's a,
Well, then you run
self-contained.
into environmental justice later, where, pollution, and we're putting affordable, low income, whatever you want to call it, next
Under the
to,
flight plan.
an area that maybe other people wouldn't want to inhabit.
So should we call it, and we can have two different opinions on this, so we don't need to resolve this here tonight. We'll come back to this. So I'm hearing two different ideas. One is this residential village that integrates, master plan kind of concept, et cetera. And then another is 100% industrial. Is that what I'm hearing from the committee?
That's the way I would look at it, because I don't think even homeless or people that are
But I really
affordable housing.
And I
would
like
wanna
your
live in
idea, maybe approaching economic development, community development, seeing if they could do a land swap.
I'm sure that Oliver can introduce me to an appropriate individual on staff.
The new director, and see if we can do a land swap.
Careful. Using the term. Politically. What are you dealing back here with as well? Okay, so we have one other area here that is this area right, it's one eye on your map. It's this area right, no, we just did that as one eye. It's
Waterman and Rialto?
J. It's right here. It's this small area right here. So.
What street is it on?
It's east of the EG Park. East of Waterman.
Is that Mill Street?
One of the streets is San Felipe, etc. And it's just east of, there's a channel, I believe, right there. And so today it's a mix.
It's south of Rialto.
Yeah, it's south of Rialto, and it's a mix of single-family, multifamily, and a small commercial. The current designation for the site is, in current zoning, is residential medium-low, which is probably consistent with what those multifamily units are as well. So the question is, this is a similar question, is whether, because you've got zoning, the county yard on the east, is again, this is a pocket, whether you would extend the industrial to the west, so basically it end at this point, or whether you maintain that residential medium-low designation.
Is the white unoccupied land in that?
The white, the vacant parcels. There's about 2/3 vacant.
And this is medium residential right now?
Yes, it's built. It's an apartment complex, I believe. So if you maintain the residential, then at least this entirety, you would have that, if you will, that continuity.
Well, it seems, this is my opinion, it seems further away from this, if it was medium residential, all would make more sense.
Is there any parks in that area? Woody, is there any parks in this area?
No parks in there.
No.
No, that's Mowbray Tree Service? Oh, that's a school, elementary school. So it's this area, right?
What is this here? Mill Street?
Rialto.
Rialto.
Oh, okay, we're still way up there.
I see.
Well, that was my suggestion. I don't know what anybody else thinks.
To keep the medium residential.
Medium residential all the way through, so that if you're
There's continuity of the whole thing.
Yeah, so if you want a workforce living, then that's possible.
I see, that's good.
Okay. Okay, next. Okay, these may become a little simpler, if you will, in terms of areas. There are a number of areas that were called out as being, if you look at the site, downtown is right here. We have a number of neighborhoods that really have a mix of units in them today. Those are all currently under zoning. They're basically well, part of this is again, part of the specific plan. This is the specific plan boundary right there. It's called out as neighborhood residential. And if you read the neighborhood residential category in the specific plan, it allows for some mix of unit type. Am I correct?
It's, yes, it does.
Okay. So it's a mixer of, the smaller lot might be duplex, triplex, single family, detached units, so that sort of mix of housing. And the area to the west, so it's this entirety of that area. So the basic question was to retain the existing designations. Right now, the designation is for what's called suburban residential, which I believe is 8 units per acre, max. 4 units per acre. Okay. So these are very like areas. Your thoughts on that? So either retain the existing designations of this neighborhood residential, which would be a mix of units, or go for the suburban residential. Again, from the community, we had ideas of keeping the residential suburban, going up to 10 units per acre, et cetera, within that area. So you have one thought to increase the density a little bit to basically make these two basically comparable.
That makes sense.
Yep. Okay.
Agreed. Well, what do you say, the specific plans addressing that, right?
Over here.
Over here, oh, okay.
Okay, the next area is 1N on your list. This is an area, and I don't remember why this was called out. I think it's because there's a fairly significant amount of vacant parcels in the area. It's 1N on your list. It's a part of the Waterman specific plan area. They called out for open space. The Waterman specific plan calls basically all this area, they created what's called an employment district, think industrial, for the area. So the question is, again, from the public, we heard some folks say that they would see this as the opportunity for infill for residential. You see some moderate density residential up here. So we have basically 2 ideas for this area. Yes, turn this into employment industrial area, or alternatively, some kind of residential density. Then I believe they went to a 10 unit per acre designation from the public.
It's light industrial, right?
Isn't this where the
it's light
auto salvage yard is?
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think that was another reason some folks were thinking about in long term was the auto salvage yard going away and becoming an opportunity to redevelop for housing.
Could happen. And then down the road, we could do a specific plan for whatever within the general plan.
So I think one of the things that's lacking in this whole general area is there's not any green space or parks particularly.
So this again, if you think about the residential village concept.
So, if you're trying to, improve the walkability and neighborhood of that area, you would certainly want to have some green space. A green walkway or beltway or some sort.
Trails, anything.
I'm not saying necessarily a square park, but perhaps a path of green that goes from baseline down.
Absolutely.
So if just note that this site right here is zoned right now for residential, for infill as well, which is 1O on our chart. So if you think about if this becomes some kind of residential village with green space integrated, you begin to think about tying this, that, and that sort of all together into a residential neighborhood kind of district.
Yeah, I mean, again, if you can make it, they're within walking distance of a, transportation corridor, that makes it very attractive.
San Bernardino's good for putting in pocket parks. We'll find a little area there and make a park.
Yeah, but like I said, the pocket parks are a great place if you go there and stay, but people like to walk.
Yeah.
So maybe a trail of some sort, you know.
What'd you call it, residential village?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think that's probably.
Well, that's kind of what we have, that's what we proposed up in this area.
Right.
You know, it makes sense to kind of continue that on down.
And connect it, from here all the way here.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm just going to mark it on here. And let's see if we have any more here. Two more. This is the area, where am I? This is south of baseline, oh, this is East End. This is out here. Area 1P on your map, and just let me get my coordinates here. It's the area, it's in this area right here. Currently, this is baseline. Center Tippecanoe is down here. So this, currently, this is designated for a specific plan for neighborhood residential. So continuing with this area. This triangle is designated for commercial, and this area is basically designated for industrial. You've got industrial to the west. So the notion is basically you fill this out, you have the opportunity for some kind of commercial serving uses, which, you know, and then residential in this area.
Supermarkets or so forth, you know, things like that, stores.
Yep.
Yeah, well, this is sort of a transition neighborhood. So you're transitioning from residential to warehouses.
Is that triangle big enough for, say, a Stater Brothers?
Oh, yeah.
It is?
That's pretty big.
So I thought do those designations make sense? Housing to the north, commercial, and then in that industrial continuity? Fill that block out? Okay.
Well, what separates it? Why is there a?
It's a flood control channel.
That's what it is. Okay.
So now you expand the area, and you're mixing residential with some commercial in there, so they don't have to travel with the gas that we have all the way to the other
Yeah,
corner.
there's some amount of density in here today, so again, it's...
Is the flood control a channel, or is there a crossing?
Yes, it's a concrete channel.
So the only crossing is over Tippecanoe and the street here to get to the triangle?
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Guess you got to design it well to make it walkable. Because if not, people are just going to drive there.
Yeah, that's going to be difficult to make it into a walkable area.
So the triangles is basically, it's only accessible then off of, only on one street. So that really doesn't work very good for residential or retail, does it?
Yeah, it almost seems like industrial because it's separated by the channel.
So you actually have two channels. You got a channel here and a channel here, and the two channels.
I mean, I get the residential. I mean, I think that's great, but the channel seems to separate it. And I mean, personally, I don't know. I'm not seeing how many people are going to cross over just to go to that commercial strip. I mean, if there was commercial, it would be here, then residential. It seems like just because of the channel, that would all be industrial, it seems like.
I think this is all mobile homes right now?
Yep. So we're okay with that for right now. I think this is one of those areas you look at. We're working on a project down in Carson. We have the Dominguez Channel, and we're actually doing a bridge across to the commercial.
That's what I'm saying.
I was just going to say that.
And it's the developers doing the bridge.
The developer,
Yeah.
right.
Okay, one last area is the area out here. For some reason, we don't have a circle around it. It's commercial. It's a small strip. Let's just keep it commercial. I'll move down on this. It's too small a parcel to do anything with, et cetera. It's right there, and it's commercial.
Is that Del Rosa?
No, Del Rosa's further to
This
the
is
east.
Sterling.
Yeah, we are.
Del Rosa's over here.
Yeah. Okay, time-wise, let me just, we have 2 more meetings, So we got through one tonight, though we talked about a lot of other things. Our next area will be Ward 2. I'll just pull it out. Look at it in the interim. We're coming back together at our next meeting. I'm just not going to start it now because of the time, but just remind you, I'll just sort of remind you of what we're looking at in Area 2. We'll be looking at an area that we effectively have already talked about, baseline. So I think we've established the principles for baseline here tonight. You will see in terms of the recommendation, well, again, the node, the commercial, the mixed-use center, et cetera. Similar kinds of considerations for Highland. You will see that there was some, a little bit different up here in a portion of Highland between DE and over here to, where am I, Sierra, is basically to require ground, because this is a little bit different than what we have down on Baseline. We have some pretty active commercial uses there, neighborhood serving commercial uses. Is rather than calling this, well, it might be called a mixed-use corridor, is to require, unlike other areas we require the commercial being concentrated in intersections, is to require the entire length to have a ground level commercial within the area. That's the be thinking about that. We maybe I'll get through that quickly. And then we have the same questions about D and E north of baseline. And over here we have again the hospital. And then we have also, the question is whether we begin to emphasize medical office to the northern portion of it, because you have some of that in the area. And then other uses, and then a node down here. And then we get over here to Del Rosa area in terms of what it becomes. Here you have some deeper parcels, et cetera. So begin to be thinking about that. And so we have a few areas of some, again, fragment parcels. Take a look at in your zone. We'll look at that at our next meeting, and then just preview of 3, just to remind you of things to be looking at. 3 is we're to the south. And let me indicate just a couple things that stand out here. We have, again, downtown up here. We have the stadium area, and we have some basic notions about actually creating a stadium district, et cetera. I will also share with you there is the idea, and I don't think this is I don't know how much I can reveal here. Basically, there's going to be some changes happening at the Orange Show grounds. And the notion of actually beginning to think about all of this as a mini LA Live entertainment recreation district surfacing on the table. So the notion, basically that would basically say no more industrial zoning in the area. That it begins to be that entertainment supporting uses, recreation uses themselves. We do have, again, this question about these residential infill sites and pockets around southwest of the airport. This is the flight zone, et cetera. So we have really scattered residential. This is some of the lowest income housing within the city. But again, the zoning today is industrial. And indeed, the question is sort of addressed in the other area, but I think more profoundly here. In some of the other areas, you addressed that particular question themselves. We have another portion of Mount Vernon, et cetera. We have the college area down here. When we had talked before, we had talked about the area adjacent to the college of being housing. That property has now been acquired, not for housing. So that's another discussion we'll have as we meet next time as well. And then there's some other pockets here. So those are the areas to be looking at for your homework, if you will, to be thinking about as we come together on our meeting on the 9th.
Woody, I got one other question. Ward 1, we've done that. But how are we going to determine where we're going to put 8,100 houses?
I believe we may have enough capacity today.
Oh, okay.
I haven't seen the report yet. It's in the process. The housing consultant who you met here when your meeting ago, Mark Hoffman, is running those numbers right now. Now, I will say that in the downtown plan area, they have capacity for 15,000 units.
For the high rise.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, it's a mix. There are some that are, 2 and 3 stories, and as we said earlier, there's some that.
Well, we're long or short of it. We're not going to have a problem finding where to put it.
Compared to South Pasadena, where I'm also working, This will be a snap.
Slam dunk. All right.
Try to find sites for 1,000 housing units in South Pasadena.
They keep claiming they're built out.
They are, and there's no,
But there's a lot of sky up there.
but what sites do you go to the sky on?
Yeah.
When you've got $3 million house, the cheapest house in the city, where do you build up? That was back to the reality of the economic issues of creating mixed-use development. That's even more profound. Okay, that's a sidebar. So that's it. Chairperson, back to you. So thank you for all the good work. Again, be thinking about this for our meeting next time, and we'll get through it.
Sounds like a home steer.
Yeah, I don't want them on my fifth ward. The people don't want them up there. You want 8,000 homes up in the fifth ward?
Make sure you include the BDUs with those homes.
Yeah.
Well, I figured I would know.
North Burton is a no-no.
So this is when we're not going to stick the knife right in there. You want to close the meeting?
Okay, then with that, the General Plan Advisory Committee reports and announcements from the committee members. Hey, any announcements? A report back? Director's report?
The only thing that I'd like to report is when we adjourn, if we could adjourn to June the 9th, please.
June what?
9th. It says 16, but we're requesting the 9th instead.
We're requesting June 9 to meet again for this. Okay.
That's
okay.
correct. Thank you.
Do we have a schedule beyond that for meetings, so we can kind of plan the summer?
We will give you the schedule once we have the conversation about future meetings that will be funded.
Oh. So I kept playing that check.
Once, let me try to project. We should be through with the land use mapping by July. Take your vacation in August or September.
Maybe if they don't afford to by then, I don't know.
They run out of money.
Okay, there being no other business before the committee, then I move that we adjourn. Agreed?
Second?
Okay.
Second.